suspected Redstone Stable of sending him that letter. Apparently, Stable owned a barber shop in the financial district. I figured there would be no harm in asking Stable about it directly. I grabbed a taxi cab and told the driver where I wanted to go. I thought about talking with him on our way. Long shift? I asked. Exhaled the driver, with as much gravel as a cement misker. Been on the road 6 hours. Probably pulling another 6 before I go back to the missus. Seems like a waste away in this taxi while the boss just overflows his coffers. I kept him talking, and he complained about his life for a while. He ended with, "But it's all the same shit for the working folks, ain't it? They tell us we gotta hope, but then the rich make the rules, and only the rich break 'em too. I've been reading Henry R. Carey. Fella talks a lot about this. Says America is ruled in secret by rich men, and the wise leaders don't get up to the top, and it ain't encouraged to do so. So, what's your way out?" He smiled. "Keep reading, stay sharp, become one of the rich men. The great thing about America, anyone can get there." I agreed with him. "The power of the free market," I said. "You get out what you put in." The cab driver smiled and nodded. "Anyhow," he said, "we've arrived. You have a good one, miss." I thanked him and left the taxi cab. The barber shop was down an alley in the financial district, opposite the red brick National Bank. The small bell above the door twinkled as I walked in. The hat rack was a deep mahogany, engraved with gold lettering that read Fraser & Co. Furnishings. The maroon leather chair looked comfortable. It seemed elaborate for the barbershop waiting chair. Stable's cabinet was similar to my own, but where mine was a dull grey metal, his was a deep red wood that looked heavy. The frame on the back wall contained a yellowed photograph of an old man. He had an authentic smile and held scissors in his left hand. The two sides of the mirror's frame were cylindrical, painted blue, red, and white to look like barber's poles. They clashed with the otherwise elegant furnishings. The modern hydraulic barber chair had always seemed ostentatious to me, but this one, with its soft brown cushions and gold embroidery, was the most ornate I had ever seen. There was a tall man in the center of the room. He was wearing a flamboyant pink suit, tailored to accentuate his stature, with a maroon bow tie and a pocket square. I gathered this was Redstone Stable. The man turned to face me. He grinned, and his squinting blue eyes made the smile feel genuine. "I must apologize," he said. "We do not take walk-ins." I told him why I was there. "I'm not here for a chop. Just answer, Stable." He scolded. "Oh, Miss Malone, you know you are not a standard detective. Please do not be as mundane as all the other sleuths." I asked how he'd known my name. He tisked a few times and said, "Miss Malone, that is another dull retort." His eyes became dull. "What is it you want with me?" He didn't seem to like my straightforward approach, but I had no time to mince words. I needed to get my information and move on. Okay. The frame on the back wall contained a yellow photograph of an old man. He had an authentic smile and held scissors in his left hand. I pointed to the picture frame on the wall. "That the old man?" I asked. Stable turned to look at the photograph. "No, that is my grandfather, taken near the end of his life." "Why did you hang it in here?" "This store was formerly owned by my grandfather. He started with humble beginnings. My Zadie taught me the meaning of hard work and dedication. I am humbled by reminders of him." Well, Miss Malone, he smiled. Will there be anything else? Okay, so, I pulled Green's note from my pocket and showed it to him, but didn't let him hold it. Green tells me this letter's from you, I told him. He doesn't like the threats. Stable lowered his head to study the note, then chuckled. His knowing grin returned to his face. But this is a Black Hand letter, he said, flourishing a hand towards the paper. Have you ever seen a Black Hand letter, Miss Malone? I confessed I hadn't. Exactly, he said. You should ring your friend Shipman at the station and ask what it means. Sam Shipman had been one of my uncle's regular partners in the vice rackets. I wondered what Shipman would have to do with Green's case. Staples seemed to think that he had a lot to do with it. I pocketed the letter and continued with my questions, but I made a note to stop by police headquarters and see Shipman. Well, Miss Malone, he smiled. Will there be anything else? Green claims you bootleg, I stated bluntly. His grin didn't waver in his response. Would you hang me on Connor Green's claims? I may partake in some gambling, but I have a talent for it, and it's nothing illegal, I assure you. And you know nothing about Green's own bootlegging? I asked. Stable shook his head. I doubted he would ever answer a question straight. Nothing now, I said, and turned back to the barber shop. The Tin Spoon Lounge was a speakeasy in North Beach run by Tiny Paul, the gangster that Green had put in with. I'd never been there. The mob keeps a tight lip on their own houses, but I figured it would be a good place to chase Green's bootlegging story. I opened the cab door in front of a North Beach warehouse with a wooden sign. The sign's text was too worn for me to decipher any of its English, but a small grey spoon was still visible below the letters. I rapped my knuckles twice over the large metal door. A panel just above my head slid sideways to reveal a pair of eyes. The eyes looked me up and down, then stared ahead. They were black and held no emotion. The room beyond was dimly lit, so I couldn't see much of their surrounding face. I cleared my throat, then a rumbling voice emerged from behind the door. Fill full your cups, feel no distress. At our great thoughts shrinking less. I looked at the eyes, still unmoving. I understood. The doorman wanted a password. I don't know what that is, but it ain't the password, came the response. The small window shut with a thud. Prohibition was a joke in San Francisco, and most speakeasies would let just about anyone through the door, but the mob ones weren't as relaxed with their rules. I knew I wouldn't enter until I said the correct response. I wondered who I could ask about a speakeasy password. Okay, maybe Frankie? This label Oh. This label had a poem on it. Fill full your cups, feel no distress. At all our great thoughts shrinking less. We'll do a good deed nevertheless. Okay. I think that's what we need. I again rapped my knuckles on the metal door. The panel slid open and the same dark eyes stared down at me. Fell for your cups, feel no distress, at all our great thoughts shrinking less, he repeated. He continued his stare, unwavering. Okay, so... bottle with poem. We'll do a good deed, nevertheless, I recited what I'd remembered from one of Frankie's bottles. The eye squinted. Wait here, came a gruff response. The panel slid shut and I heard footsteps walking away. I rolled a cigarette and waited. After a quarter of an hour, the panel opened again. Bar's closed, but you can shoot pool in the upstairs room, said the eyes. He pulled the door ajar so I could see a set of metal stairs. I walked up the stairs and opened the thin wooden door to the billiards room. It was much smaller than I'd expected for a gangster's paradise. The only light came from the hanging lamps above the billiards table. The haze of cigarette smoke darkened the room's corners. A couple tall chairs were placed around the billiards table. The pool table was the focus of the space. The light reflecting from its smooth green surface tinted the den. The room was lit only by the dangling lamps above the billiards table. The rack on the wall held 5 cues. A bottle of unlabelled wine sat on the table. I saw a tall, broad-shouldered man playing the table by himself. Based on Frankie's description, I gathered this was Tiny Paul. I cleared my throat to get him to look at me, then followed with a casual, "Are you ever going to take a shot?" He stood up straight, rested his cue on the table, and looked at me sideways. It was the petulant look of a boy forced to play with his younger siblings. "Hello," he sighed. His voice was deep. Apparently Ferry only hired baritones, but it had no gravel. It echoed slightly around the small room. I imagine he could have huffed and puffed the entire block to rubble. "I like watching them," he said, nodding to the balls on the table, "thinking through my options." I'd never shot much pool, but I thought he might like me more if I feigned interest. I considered lying to him, telling him that I played a lot. "I'll stick to cards." I didn't lie to him just then. "Stud, blackjack or bridge?" he asked hoarsely. I raised an eyebrow and he showed a sheepish grin. "The gambler plays them all." He continued after cracking his knuckles. "But I don't think you're here for a game." I asked about Green. "How's the gamble on that wine?" He grunted. "Green's setting it up. Where the muscle? What's more is there?" "You like Green?" I asked. The wrinkles on his brow deepened. "Like or dislike, it don't matter sometimes. I work with what I'm given, and he's given us a good lead. I suppose that's why you're here, Malone." So he'd known me too. The doorman must have looked me up. The bay talks fast. "Anyhow," he said, eyeing the billiards table, "you need anything else from me? If you want something better, ask specific." Mobsters never failed to grate my nerves. He wouldn't tell me anything unless I pushed him with what I already knew. "We'll do a good deed, nevertheless," I repeated to Paul. "Why make an old liquor slogan your password?" Paul smiled. "An old liquor slogan? That's rich. And here I thought you dicks were supposed to be learned." I raised a questioning brow. "It's called The Drinking Song, a poem by Thomas Hardy, an old Brit." I asked more about the poem. "It's all about a man thinking we're at the top of the chain and slowly understanding we aren't. All our thoughts, all our theories amount to nothing. We're just apes floating in the wide ocean of space." How can you possibly cope with that? How do we even know what we are now? "But to hell with it. Take your mind off it, have a drink, do something good." Not a bad code if you ask me.
I tilted my head, neither agreeing or disagreeing, but simply impressed by Paul's knowledge of Victorian poetry.
Alright, that's enough of a lesson. Is it something else you wanted, or can I get back to this?
He motioned to the billiards table. That bottle on the table, I asked. He said,
That's the stuff. A sample from Green Source.
I know some Napa wine that smells exactly like that, I said to him.
That's so? He smiled. Well, that one's from Vancouver.
I had to work every muscle in my face to stop my jaw from hitting the floor. Where's the wine from again, Paul? I asked him again.
It's from Vancouver, he repeated.
Frankie had told me that only Napa grapes had this type of spice. If Paul didn't know this bottle was local, I wasn't going to tell him. But it told me something very important. I had to confirm with Frankie, but if my hunch was on the money, then Connor Green was not getting his wine from Canada, and he wasn't playing square with Tiny Paul.
Anything else?
Paul asked me. I snapped back into the moment and considered if I needed him to tell me anything else, though I'd just snagged quite the load. Know anything about this note? I asked, and pulled out the letter with the black hand on it. Tiny Paul looked at the page, then laughed with his whole body.
So there is a letter. Green's shaken over that. I'm not losing sleep though. Look, Green and I aren't best pals, but nobody will touch him without protection, and none of us sent it to him, or else I would have known about it. Anything else? He asked.
Know anything about Redstone Stable? I asked.
Heard the name, he replied. But why all the gossip? He could tell you more about himself.
You won't give me anything on him?
Now why would I do that?
He shook his head and asked, anything else? I tried to work something about the stable from Tiny Paul, but he withstood my browbeating without letting anything slip. I didn't have anything else to say to him, so he cracked his knuckles, arched over the table, and resumed lining up shops. I thought about heading back down the dark stairs to the street. Green's house might contain more clues about his past, or some reason a threatening letter would come his way, and if I got lucky, Mrs. Green would be there to pump with more questions. I flagged a taxi cab and was on my way. I thought about chatting with the driver to pass the time. We began talking about his home state of Colorado. Lovely land, he said. Truly blessed with clean air and wildflowers. I asked why he'd left. The people is mostly fine, It's the politics that are rotten. See, I married an Irish Catholic. Now most folks are backwards on that. But at least out there, they keep it to themselves. That clan is seeped right through the core of my beautiful state. And now the clan is starting to think national. They're anti-black, anti-Jew, anti-Catholic, anti-Mason, anti-you name it. He shook his head. A day of reckoning is coming with the KKK and our politics. I just hope sanity wins. I hope so too, I said. We came to my destination and I stepped out of the taxi cab. The Greens' apartment was a section of an old Western Addition mansion. The owners had divided it for struggling families to rent after the 1906 fire. Once downtown had been rebuilt, people of means moved out of the area. Recent immigrants, mainly from Japan, rented most of the apartments in this part of town. I knocked on the front door but didn't get a response. The latch was undone, so I pushed it open and stepped into the room. The apartment had a dense cloud of black smoke hanging from the ceiling. Apparently that window wasn't opened much, and either Mr. or Mrs. Green smoked heavily. The grey trench coat was hanging in the doorway. It certainly looked identical to Lewis's. I searched the pockets and found no identifying marks. It might have been a different jacket, but its recent appearance was off-putting. The bottles on top of the round table were mostly empty. I opened the drawer of the backmost table. In it were 2 train tickets. I mumbled, "St. Louis?" to myself, but then came the cackling voice of Mrs. Green. "Forget about moving, Connor. I won't budge." Her head was raised, but her eyelids still remained closed. I asked her further questions, but her head just lolled back to where it had been. There was nothing else she'd say. The ashtray on top of the smallest table was overflowing with spent cigarettes. I found Mrs. Green slumped in her chair, eyes closed, head rocking slowly. "Hello, Mrs. Green," I said loudly. She let out a long moan from the chair, then lifted her head, but failed to raise her eyelids. She tilted her head to the side, giggled, then let it loll back into place. I shook her lightly, and she moaned again, but said nothing more. Empty bottles were strewn around the apartment. I brought one to my nose and smelled the distinct aroma of laudanum, opium mixed with booze, a harsh tonic. A wilting plant was on the furthest table from the door. I could never keep plants alive either. Even as the petals fell, they were still a vibrant yellow. Okay, well, I've searched everything. We can't talk to her. She's sleeping. We can't wake her, so I guess we're leaving. Okay, we did get something from Stable's barbershop that we should go to the police station, so we'll head here. I always dreaded visiting the PD after I'd flown the coop, and I was in no mood right now. But if Shipman did know something about Green's note, I had to chase it up. Dumb things on street, so many dumb things on street. Dumb things on street, so many